I woke up warm, too warm. The kind of suffocating heat that didn't make sense when you couldn't remember getting into bed. The loft smelled like pine and something medicinal. Through the triangular window at the peak of the roof, the light was gray, flat. It must have been mid-afternoon, but the blizzard outside made it look dead. My thoughts were thick, slow, like honey in cold weather. I tried to piece together where I was, how I'd gotten there, but the memories were slippery. They vanished the second I tried to grab them. Then the stairs creaked. "You're awake!" Thomas stood at the top of the steps. He was holding a bowl of soup, steam curling in his hands. He smiled at me the way you'd smile at something fragile, something broken. I knew him. I must have known him. His face was familiar, but frustratingly vague, like a word on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite spit out. "I brought you some lunch." He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge. It felt too close. Not wrong exactly, just unearned. I took the bowl because I didn't know what else to do. "Tomorrow's our anniversary," he said, as he brushed a stray hair back from my forehead. "I've got big plans." The words landed wrong. Anniversary? I searched for a memory of us, of a life shared, and I came up empty. The idea of celebrating anything with this man made my stomach tighten. I shifted in the bed, and that's when I felt it. A dead weight dragging on my right leg. I pulled back the blankets and looked down. Plaster, white and heavy, encasing me from ankle to mid-thigh. "What?" "The accident," Thomas said gently. "Don't you remember?" "You've been healing up really well, though. Another few weeks and we'll get the cast off." Accident? The word floated in the fog. I didn't remember a crash. I didn't remember anything that would have put me in a cast. Then a draft hit my face. It was cold. It curled up from the open railing overlooking the living room below. I looked past him, down toward the main floor. There was a heavy door near the bottom of the stairs, paint peeling around the frame. Air was whistling through the gap at the bottom. "What's down there?" Thomas's expression changed. The warmth drained out of his face instantly. "Basement sealed," he said flatly. "Toxic mold, rat filth. I bolted it shut when you got sick." He leaned forward. His voice softened, but it didn't sound like concern anymore. It sounded like a warning. "Your immune system's still weak. Can't risk the exposure." The explanation came too fast, too rehearsed. I stared down at the floor and felt something shift in my chest, a quiet alarm that I couldn't silence. Thomas reached out and touched my leg. Not the cast, but my thigh. His hand moved with a terrifying familiarity, like he had done this 1,000 times before without asking. I went rigid. "I've missed you," he murmured. His hand slid higher. Panic spiked through the fog. I needed him to stop. I needed distance. "I can't," the words came out strangled. "I'm starting my period." His hand stopped. He pulled back, looking at me with disappointment, not anger. "No, you're not," he said. "That's next week." The certainty in his voice made my skin crawl. He knew. He knew my cycle better than I did. He sighed and stood up. "You need rest anyway. Big day tomorrow." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange bottle. The rattle of pills sounded like dry bones. "Almost forgot," he said. He shook one out. It was small and blue. "For the pain. Doctor's orders." He held it out to me. I didn't want it, but I couldn't say no, not after rejecting him. I put the pill on my tongue, took a glass of water from the nightstand, threw back my head and drank, but tucked the pill into the pocket of my cheek. "That's a good girl," he said. He headed for the stairs, pausing at the railing. "I'll sleep on the couch tonight. Give you space to recover." Then he descended into the gloom of the living room. I laid back down there in the gray light, listening to his heavy footsteps on the floorboards below. There was no door to close, no lock to turn. I was alone with him, and there was nothing between us but 12 wooden steps. The front door slammed shut downstairs. Thomas was gone. Outside, I heard the scrape of shovel against the metal vents. I sat up instantly. I spit the blue pill into my palm. It was wet, already starting to dissolve. I shoved it deep under the mattress, wiping my hands on the sheets. The noise outside should have calmed me, but it didn't. Without the pill, the fog in my head started to lift a little bit. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like ice cracking, just enough for the panic to seep through. I needed water. I needed to move. I needed to prove I wasn't completely helpless. The crutches were leaning against the nightstand. I grabbed them and pushed myself upright. My arms shook. The cast felt like an anchor bolted to my leg. I took the stairs one at a time. Every step sent a sharp jolt through my shoulders. I froze halfway down, listening for the door latch. Nothing but the wind. So I kept going. The kitchen was small, clean, sterile. There were dishes drying on a rack and a calendar on the wall. It all looked normal. And somehow that made it worse. I reached for a glass from the cabinet. My hand slipped. The rubber tip of the crutch swung out and clipped the edge of the trash can. It tipped over. Garbage spilled across the linoleum, coffee grounds, eggshells, a torn envelope. I steadied myself against the counter. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I didn't let myself panic. I just needed to clean it up. I needed to leave no trace. I lowered myself onto the floor. I started scooping the trash back into the bin with my bare hands. And that's when I saw it. A milk carton, half crushed. Photo on the side was faded, but the face was clear. I picked it up. The woman in the picture was younger than I remembered. She was smiling. Her hair was a little longer. She looked like me. Missing, Elena Price. Last seen October 1984. I read it. Then I read it again. It was my name. It was my face. But I'd only been here a week. Maybe 2? The accident was recent. Thomas said so. Then I turned the carton over. Expiration date, February 18th, 1987. The numbers didn't make any sense. I mean, they couldn't. But I did the math anyway. Years. Not weeks. Years. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. The accident wasn't real. None of this was real. The silence in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, as if it was pressing in on me from all sides. Then I heard the crunch. Boots on snow. I jolted. The footsteps were getting closer to the porch. I shoved the trash back into the bin. The carton went in last, buried deep. I kicked the can upright and grabbed my crutches. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could without making any noise, each step feeling like the wood was going to snap underneath me. I reached the top of the loft and collapsed into the bed. I arranged my limbs exactly how they'd been before. I pulled the blanket over my leg. I turned my face towards the wall. The front door creaked open downstairs. I could hear Thomas's footsteps as I crossed the living room. He stopped at the base of the stairs. I heard him climb. Slowly. The wood groaned under his weight, one step at a time. He stood beside the bed. I could feel him watching me. I didn't move. I kept my breathing slow. I pretended the fog was still there. He stayed for a long time. But then finally he turned and walked back downstairs. I laid there staring at the wall, the gray light from the window fading across the pillow. I wasn't recovering from an accident. I was a prisoner, and the man caring for me wasn't my husband. I laid still for the next few hours. I forced my breathing to be slow, heavy, the rhythm of deep, drugged sleep. Downstairs, I could hear the couch springs creaking. Then they stopped. Thomas's breathing settled into a low snore. I waited until the silence felt heavy. I sat up. The crutches were useless here. The wood would scream if I put any weight on them. So I left them leaning against the wall. I scooted to the edge of the landing and lowered myself onto my good hip. I took the stairs sitting down, one step at a time. The cast was dead weight in front of me. I had to grab the plaster with both hands and lower it gently over the edge of each step to keep it from slamming against the wood. Thump, slide, thump. It took forever. At the bottom, I laid flat on the floorboards. Thomas was 10 feet away. His arm hung off the couch, fingers brushing the rug below. The only way to get to the back door was past him, through the open living room. I dug my elbows into the carpet and pulled, dragged my body forward. The cast scraped softly across the rug. I held my breath. I crawled past his hand. I was close enough to smell the stale coffee on him, close enough to feel his body heat. He didn't move. I reached the kitchen shadows and pulled myself into the alcove next to the back door. I pressed my back against the wall and held my breath to see if he heard me. He didn't. I was safe, for now. I reached over to the closet door next to me, but it was locked. It was a simple privacy lock, the kind you can pop with a penny. But I didn't have a penny. I tried using my thumb, but Thomas had a penchant for grooming me and clipping my nails, so that didn't work. I needed something sharp. I pawed blindly at the dusty shelf next to the frame. Dead batteries. A loose screw. And finally something thin and metal. A finishing nail. I jammed the flat tip into the hole of the knob and I wiggled it. Click. The door swung open. Inside, winter coats hung in the dark. Heavy parkas lined the back wall, pressed together shoulder to shoulder, like bodies waiting in a line. I pulled myself forward and shoved the coats aside. Behind them, pushed deep into the corner, was a canvas duffel bag. It was old, military surplus, and covered in dust. I dragged it towards me and unzipped it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the tab. The first thing I saw inside was a wallet. I flipped it open. My driver's license stared back at me through the yellowed plastic window. Elena Price, date of birth, August 14th, 1961. I stared at my own face, younger and smiling. There was a receipt tucked behind the license, a gas station in Idaho, dated October 1984. I dug deeper into the bag. At the bottom was a picture frame. The glass was cracked right down the middle. I lifted it out silently. The photo showed a wedding. White dress, simple flowers. The bride was me. Younger, thinner, glowing. The groom that stood beside me with his arm around my waist had a soft jaw and kind eyes. I recognized him instantly. Not because I remembered the wedding, not because I could recall his voice. I recognized him because he wasn't the man sleeping on the couch 10 feet away. My husband was someone else. The warmth of the cabin suddenly felt suffocating. The clean dishes, the calendars, the soup. This wasn't a home. This was a cage. I slowly opened the closet door and looked back at the living room. Thomas was asleep on the couch. Directly behind him, under the staircase I had just come down, was the sealed door to the basement. Thomas said that the basement was sealed, and it was toxic and dangerous. But he lied about everything else. I looked toward the exterior door at the back of the alcove. It was bolted from the inside. I fumbled around on the shelf above the coats and was able to find an old, heavy Maglite flashlight. It was cold metal, but it was a weapon. I grabbed the nearest coat from the rack. It was heavy, wool, and way too big for me. I shoved my arms into the sleeves. It smelled like stale tobacco and dust. I slowly closed the door to the alcove and dragged myself to the back door. I unlocked the bolt and pulled the door open. The cold hit me like a fist. I stumbled off the porch and sank. The snow swallowed me to the knees instantly. The wind tore the air right out of my lungs. I tried to run. The cast dragged through powder like a concrete block chained to my leg. I got 3 steps before I fell. My hands punched through the snow. The cold burned my skin. I tried to push myself up, but the cast pulled me sideways. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the cloudy gray sky. The road was a 1/4 mile away, maybe less. I couldn't even see it through the storm. I would freeze before I even made it halfway. I swept the flashlight beam across the yard. Trees, snowdrifts, the woodpile half buried against the side of the house. And then, slanted metal doors. The storm cellar. The basement, half covered in snow. I dragged myself towards it. Not to hide, to find tools. A saw, a knife, a pair of scissors. Anything to cut this thing off my leg. The door to the storm cellar was sealed with ice. I slammed the maglite against it until the seal cracked. I was able to yank the door open. It shrieked on old, rusted hinges. A smell rose from below, sharp and chemical. Not mold, not rot. I hesitated. Thomas said the basement was toxic. He said it would kill me. But if I couldn't move fast with the cast, I couldn't survive the blizzard, and I couldn't go back inside. I had no choice. I descended. The concrete steps were narrow and slick. I held the flashlight in one hand and used the wall to steady myself. The cast thumped against each step. At the bottom, the air was cold but still. The hum of the generator filled the space. I swept the flashlight across the room. Shelves lined the walls, cans of paint thinner, mason jars full of nails, a workbench in the corner with a pegboard and tools above it. I limped over to it. The flashlight caught something along the way. A chest freezer. Massive. White. Humming steadily in the corner. It had a heavy padlock on the latch. I stopped. The logic of the room fractured. Who locks a freezer in a sealed basement? I moved over to the freezer. I told myself I needed keys or tools or something useful. But that wasn't the truth. I needed to know what was inside. I raised the maglite and swung it down hard against the padlock. The rusted hasp snapped on impact. The sound crackled through the cellar like a gunshot. I froze, listened for any movement above. Nothing but the wind. I grabbed the lid and heaved it open. Cold air rushed out. Not freezer cold. Chemical cold. Dry ice. I aimed the flashlight inside, and that's when I saw him. He was curled up on his side, blue, frozen solid. His hands were tucked against his chest like he'd been trying to stay warm. I recognized his face immediately. The man from the photograph. My husband. The real one. My knees buckled. I hit the concrete hard. The air left my lungs and didn't come back. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared. He'd been down here this whole time? 10 feet below me while I ate soup? While I slept? While I pretended to be someone else's wife? I pressed a fist against my mouth to stop the sound, but it came anyway. A silent, shaking sob that tore through my chest. I reached out, my fingers hovered over the edge of the freezer. I couldn't touch him. I looked down at my leg, at the heavy white cast that kept me trapped for years. The lie that held me still while Thomas played house over my husband's grave. The grief collapsed into something sharper, hotter. Rage. I couldn't mourn him while wearing this. I shoved myself upright and staggered over to the workbench. My hands swept across the tools, wrenches, pliers, tin snips. I grabbed them. The metal was cold and rusted. My fingers were numb and clumsy. I jammed the blades into the plaster and squeezed. It barely scratched the surface. I squeezed harder. The rust bit into my palm. The cast cracked. I wedged the snips deeper and twisted. A chunk broke free. I hacked at it again and again and again. The plaster shattered in pieces across the floor. My hands were bleeding now, slick with sweat and rust. The cast split open. I pried the halves apart and kicked it off. My leg slid free. The skin underneath was pale, thin. The muscle had wasted away to almost nothing, but there was no break, no fracture, no injury at all. It had never been broken. I forced myself to stand. My leg shook violently. It nearly gave out. I grabbed the edge of the freezer to steady myself. I took a step, then another. My legs held. Click. A sound came on from across the cellar. I spun around. The interior door, the one Thomas said was sealed, swung open. A beam of light cut the darkness, yellow and flickering. He stood at the top of the wooden stairs, kerosene lantern in one hand, pill bottle in the other. The pills rattled as he descended the first step. Elena. His voice was calm, gentle, like I was a child who'd wandered too far from home. The stairs groaned under his weight. He didn't rush. He took his time coming down into the dark. I know you're scared, he said. His voice was patient, practiced, but one dose will fix everything. He shook the bottle gently, rattle, rattle, like he was coaxing a stray dog. The fear goes away, the cold, all of it. He stopped a few steps from the bottom. You won't remember the freezer. You won't remember him. He gestured towards the body behind me without looking at it. We can go back to being a family. You, me, and once you're healed, once you're really ready, we can finally make that baby you've been wanting. My back hit the workbench. There was nowhere left to go. He was offering me erasure, not comfort, not safety. He was going to hollow me out. He was going to turn me into a doll he could reshape, reprogram, breed with. Forgetting at this point was worse than dying. No. The word came out hoarse, barely a whisper. He stopped. The warmth vanished from his face. Elena, his tone shifted, disappointed, like I'd failed a test. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I shook my head. He sighed, a long, tired exhale. Then he pocketed the pill bottle. I didn't want to do this, he said quietly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a syringe. The liquid inside was cloudy, a gray-white. It caught the lantern light as he held it up. We need a hard reset again, don't we? His patience was gone. I could see the flatness in his eyes. He lunged at me. He moved fast for a big man. I threw myself sideways, my weak leg buckled, and I slammed into the metal shelves. Cans of paint thinner crashed into the floor around me. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron. I swung the mag light. It connected with his shoulder, a loud thud. He grunted, but he didn't let me go. He only yanked me closer. The needle was inches from my neck. My free hand swept the workbench behind me, looking for tools, nails, anything. Then I found it, something cold, cylindrical, acetone. I uncapped it. I didn't aim, I just squeezed. The mist hit the lantern in his other hand. The air detonated and the blast threw me backwards. Heat hit me like a physical wave. I slammed into the concrete wall and slid down. My ears were ringing. My body was in agony. The lantern shattered in his hand. Burning kerosene splashed across his chest and arms. He ignited. The flames spread fast. Up his sleeve, across his face. He screamed. Not words, just noise. High and animal. He stumbled backwards towards the wooden stairs, thrashing, trying to beat out the fire. His body blocked the doorway to the cabin completely. There was no way past him. I scrambled away from the heat. I turned towards the storm doors. I threw myself at the concrete steps. I dragged my weak leg behind me. It was dead weight. I clawed my way up. The concrete was slick. The air in the cellar was vanishing, sucked into the fire. Behind me, his screams turned wet, choking. I didn't look back. I hit the storm doors with both hands and shoved. The metal shrieked open. Snow blasted into my face. I hauled myself up, my weak leg buckled on the edge, but I dug my fingers into the frozen dirt and pulled. I rolled out into the blizzard. The wind swallowed his screaming instantly. I grabbed the heavy doors and yanked them down. The bolt slammed home. The earth sealed around him. I collapsed into the snow. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't feel them anymore. Then I heard it. A roar like a train coming. I turned around. The A-frame was already gone. The fire had climbed the stairwell instantly, racing straight for the peak. Then there was a boom. The bay window blew out. Glass hissed in the snow. The roof caught fire next. The whole structure turned into a torch. Anyone within miles would see it. I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled. The atrophied muscles screamed with every step. But they held. I limped towards the dark road. One step, then another. Behind me, the fire roared higher. The heat pressed against my back even through the blizzard. I didn't stop. I didn't look back at the lie he'd built, the warmth he'd used to cage me. I walked into the darkness, step by step, no longer his wife, no longer his doll.